Okay, welcome to day 2. Can someone online give us an indication they can hear us okay?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you. We left off yesterday with the biology and ecology program. So let's just pick it up. Our first presentation, I believe, is
I'll just do the first introduction.
okay.
Yep, can we start? Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to resume the updates on the biological and system science research update on the third research area that we're going to be discussing today. That's mortality and survival assessment. As you probably recall, we completed the first component of the discard mortality rate estimation on the longline fishery. And the only update that is really worth mentioning is that earlier this year we published the final paper on the characterization of injuries related to viabilities and physiological characterization of the fish that have high survivability. So that was published in Ocean and Coastal Management, and that makes a total of 2 papers that we published from that study. It was funded by Saltonstall Kennedy. The component that Claude will speak to in a second is the second aspect on discard mortality rate, and that's referring to the charcoal recreational fishery. We presented in the past a few results on the mortality estimations, but Claude will now present some of the additional data that we've been generating, characterizing viabilities in that recreational fishery. Go ahead, Claude.
Sounds good. All right. So for the for the recreational charter work, again, this is focused on the charter sector, not the self-guided sector or weekend fishermen. This was a project we did in Alaska, out of the ports of Sitka and Seward. And we compared hook sizes of 12-aught and 16-aught. You can see those demonstrated in the photo on the lower left. And we looked at those are the typical hooks that are being used in that fishery. Those are circle hooks. And we had done a survey prior to the work to kind of gauge how the fishers were fishing, what gear they were using, what the typical landing practices were, and whatnot. We did not see any differences in the length of fish that were being caught on those 2 hook sizes, likely because the majority of the fish the selectivity curves for those hooks are overlapping on the size of fish that they are targeting. On the right-hand side, you see the typical injuries generated by the hooks, with the left-hand column on the upper panel showing the 12-aught hook, and on the right hand, the 16-aught hook, the larger hook. Both of them, the majority of the hooking injuries are very similar to what we saw actually in the commercial study that Joseph just mentioned. But the majority of them are the torn cheek injury, or simply the hooking injury itself. And when they release the fish, the hook goes back out to that same hole that it entered on. There are also a number of eye injuries. These were not significantly different between the 2 hooks. But there's a possibility there's some differences there on survivability. As you can see down on the lower panel, that shows what the profiles of fish when they were released, of those fish that have been now recaptured. So all those fish that were released were tagged, and the recaptures show that there's a lot of torn cheek injuries, but very few to no eye injuries, whereas those that are still at large had those eye injuries. So it's questionable whether they're surviving or not, but we need a few more years of data probably to properly flesh that out. We also took blood samples from these fish, and we've been looking at those. So we looked at stress indicators within the blood plasma, so glucose levels, lactate levels, and cortisol levels, progressing down the rows here. We saw an increase in each of those elements or each of those stress indicators over the duration of the fight time that the fish were fighting on. But as far as being able to kind of better predict their viabilities, we didn't see any differences there, with the caveat that the majority of these fish that were caught were in the excellent category. We actually combined the moderate and poor categories because there was only a total of 11 fish in that combined category, 9 of them in the moderate category and 2 in the poor category. The poor ones were typically animals that had got swallowed the hooks, so they swallowed them in deeper. But again, for any of these stress indicators, we didn't see any at the time of sampling. We didn't see any differences that separated those classifications of excellent, moderate, poor, and there was no fish in that category. Looking at some of the size and condition influences on those viability categories, fish length was not different between the groups. Fulton's K, same, and fat was not different. We used a portable fat meter, a handheld fat meter that we test the fish out in the wild with.
The stress indicators, do you have those by return or still at large? They did with the injury. So
We haven't done that just yet, but that's easy to do.
that might be interesting to see whether those are actually predictive.
Definitely.
When the fish comes back.
Yeah.
It might be that they don't correlate with fight time, but they're still indicative of how much that fish has suffered from.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. The other thing that's confounded there that you just reminded me of is fight time is confounded by size of fish. So the larger the fish, the longer the fight time. Sorry. So looking at, we did tag 80 of these fish with survival pop-up archival tags. So these are tags that do report back in their battery on board, and they're tracking the pitch and roll of the tag itself. Gives us information on, without having to rely just on fishery returns, gives us information on the survivability and the activity of those fish. It's probably a little easier to see in your online documents, but this shows the releases and recoveries of those SPAT tags. They were all released out of the Seward fishing effort. And we had 76 of those tags return or be functional. And out of those, we had 1 fish that died, and the rest were considered to be alive at the time of tag release. In the table below the image there, the map there, you can see that the females in general were traveling quite a bit farther than the males. That's something that we haven't looked at before, and it was a bit of an interesting observation. We saw that both in premature releases as well as in full duration releases. The majority of the premature releases, the animals, the tags show that the animal was alive at the time of release. So we're not 100% sure why those tags were releasing early. They indicated that the pin that burns off if it's on for the full duration, that the pin was still intact when the tag came off. And so that either means that the attachment system failed or it somehow pulled out of the animal or something like that. But we do know that they were alive at those times. So using that information, we were able to do a Kaplan-Meier survival curve. And that shows a discard mortality rate estimate of 1.35% with confidence intervals from roughly 0 to 4%. Again, all those tags were put out on excellent viability fish. Having said that, it would have been hard to put them on poorer fish because it was hard to get fish in poorer condition. So,
What fraction again were excellent viability?
So there was 350 out of 361 that were excellent. So very high. Excellent category. I don't know the percentage on that right off the top of my head. So our conclusions from that is that for the different hook sizes, we did not see a different size selectivity in this study. The majority of injuries, roughly 75% of them, were the simple torn cheek injury. Blood stress indicators increased with fight time, but were not significantly different between either viability or injury classifications. Fish size, fitness, and fat levels were similar across all viability classifications. The estimated TMR is very low for fish of excellent viability in that fishery.
I think you can make a broader statement about fish caught in the fishery if you just going to take the extreme case and assume that like 3% of fish that were not excellent all died. You're still bounding that problem overall to be less than a 5% increase in mortality rate.
Right. Okay.
Might be worth thinking about making that broad statement, because that statement right there, I think, is not really exactly what people care about, right?
Right.
What we care about is overall is the release mortality rates for all fish captured.
Yeah.
And it's tiny because most of them end up in excellent condition. Most of those
Most of those survive. Yeah, that's fair.
Did you say that females move longer distances than males?
Yes.
I'm just thinking about this lack of genetic differentiation by area. That would it be worth zooming into sex-specific areas of the chromosome and seeing whether the structure can be found more in males than in females?
Yeah, I just had kind of the same thought going through my head, and like wrote a note, how to possibly look at that with the genetic data.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, so like mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally, but then Pacific halibut are on like a CCW sex determination system. So I guess with males, like, I have to put, with males, I'm not sure. I mean, you might be able to do it with females, but not necessarily. I don't know, I have to put a little more thought into that, but I think it could be an interesting way to look at the genetic data as well.
And I think you should specifically look at males because
Yeah.
females move around
Right.
things that then in the males may.
Right.
So yeah, this is based on kind of a short time span, up to 96 days during the summer. They're theoretically on their feeding grounds. And so I think we'd want to go back and look at some of our data on wire tags and how far are those animals moving, or even some of our summer to winter tagging. I think a lot of that was done on females because we wanted them on fish that were large enough that the tag itself wasn't changing the behavior of the animal. Because we saw that in aquarium studies where if the tag, as the animal swam, if it touched the tail, that animal would just continue swimming because something was touching it. And so then that's a case where that's a case where your tagging part is having an effect on the overall behavior. So we have a cutoff of about 50 centimeters and larger that we will tag on. A lot of our summer to winter, we were most interested in where are the females going to spawn. We weren't looking at the males. But we probably have some wire data that we can resolve that a little bit.
Wire data that doesn't have sex.
It doesn't have sex because it's caught in the commercial fishery before we were doing a fin flip. Still, even with ratios, we could probably get some sense of that.
It would be interesting to see whether size explains as much as sex as well. If the females are larger, it might actually just be fish size. Bigger
Right.
fish swim farther, faster.
Yeah.
It's a question that reviewers would likely ask.
Sorry, is all this published?
No, we're working on the paper now. But yeah, no, this is new and it's publishing.
Just didn't want to give lots of feedback on something that was published already.
Yeah, so any feedback's welcome. The Kaplan-Meier curve was done simply off the SPATs. We've actually had roughly 10% of the wire tags returned in this study in the first couple of years, that's normally something we see over the lifetime, over like a 10-year period. And we've seen that in the first 3 or 4 years. And so we've been talking internally about trying to use those also to further enhance that estimate. With that, this this curve is simply off the SPAP tax.
Is there any reason to think that there would be delayed mortality from catch and release beyond 2 months?
I would think not, partly based on the blood plasma levels were, you know, anywhere from 4 to 10 times lower than what we saw in the commercial fleet, and even those fish had a high survival rate. And at some, you know, a lot of these studies will only look at the fish for anywhere from 15 to 30 days post event, because after that it starts getting confounded with natural mortality and other factors. It's really hard to tease out. Did it die from the fishing event, or did it die from something else? So yeah, I don't think so. These fish are pretty robust. We had fish that we tagged and caught again a few hours later. So that they don't go, you know, a lot of them are not that adversely affected by the whole trauma of being caught, handled, tagged, released, and they come down and go, oh, food, and they grab it right away. So yeah.
In that case, maybe you can see how difficult it is to have the story seems pretty clear here.
Yeah. So moving into some fishing technology, the Halibut Commission has a long kind of history of doing work in the fishing technology area. Right now we have a couple projects on the go. One is the catch protection project. This is an effort to protect catch that's already on the gear from depredation by toothed whales. In this case, killer whales and sperm whales are frequent predators within the longline halibut fishery. I'll be speaking to that one more in a moment. We've also been doing some work in collaboration with Dr. Mark Lamelli out of Pacific States Marine Fish Commission on the use of artificial illumination to reduce bycatch in both some hook and line treatments as well as trawl treatments. And we've also been doing some work with him on circle hook modifications to reduce rockfish bycatch. He just got back from the field on a project looking at that very thing, but I'm not reporting on that today. So we, as we've presented before, we held a workshop back in 2022, looking for best practices on trying to kind of disrupt that reward cycle that's underpinning depredation, where the food is rewarding the animals to keep up the behavior. We developed 2 devices to do some pilot testing on. The first was a method that is used both in the Mediterranean and in South American fisheries, which is the idea of a branch line coming off the main line that has a shroud that slides over the catch to protect it. This sequence shows you kind of the mode of action. So this is a top-down view looking at the gear lying on the bottom of the ocean, and the animals come up, they take the bait, and then as the gear starts to haul back, the shroud slides over the fish, clumping up all the hooks together, and then it's brought to the surface with the shroud protecting the fish on the way up to the surface. The second is a device that was invented in Norway. It's a type of shuttle, or for lack of a better description, an underwater elevator. So you clip it onto the ground line, it slides down the ground line. Fish enter it from the one end through a spring-loaded door. They get released inside the device. The empty hook continues on out the back of the device. The unit keeps sliding down the ground line until it encounters a pre-installed stopper system that it then locks it shut and then carries it up to the surface on the ground line.
How does the hook get removed?
It gets removed mechanically, so the animal comes into the device, and then it encounters a long kind of keyhole shaped thing. The animal bumps up against it, and the hook's just pulled down. So it's effectively like a crucifier. It's naive to trying to remove it back through the hole that it entered on. So that was one of the concerns we had when wanting to study it. We had some ideas on how to minimize that. There's a couple of ways that we could approach that. We've decided right now to better understand, can the device be used in this fishery? What size fish is it able to entrap? And does it make sense to release any crumbs to the whales? If you're truly trying to interrupt the reward cycle, if you're using the device, should you be releasing any fish at all? So should we spend any time and energy trying to solve that problem, or should we focus more on can the device be used? And maybe it'd be better than to have a practice just like problem bears, that if you're using the device, all the fish come aboard and none of them go over. So we went out and did some field testing of this gear last year in May of 2023. We were looking at deployment and retrieval logistics, trying to determine the optimal configuration or weighting and ways of attachment, those sorts of things. And then investigate the basic performance characteristics. Do all the species get trained in them properly? What are the sizes of those? Are there some constraints there that we need to pay attention to? We also looked at injuries and things like that. So we would have a better understanding of those things.
So how big is this thing?
Great question. So it is, the shuttle is about 8.5 feet by 3 feet long by 3 feet wide. And it's roughly 60% of the size of a device that's currently being used in the Southern Ocean toothfish fishery, where they're having a big problem with whale population. In that fishery, there's a boat that actually has, it's been rebuilt around these units, and they deploy them through a moon pool to stay away from seabirds. And they deploy them on the gear, and they rest on the bottom of the ocean while the gear is fishing. They have up to 40 of these things on a boat, and then they haul all their gear in through them. But those ones are even bigger. So this was downsized, and we actually threaded it onto the gear at the surface. So we did not deploy it at the bottom. So that the idea there is it's a tool that the vessel has. If they come to haul back and there's no whales, they haul back traditionally. If there's whales, they clip on the unit. That's it.
Is all of the population occurring during haulback?
Yeah, that's a great question. We think the majority of it's happening during haulback. Often you'll see the whales just off the vessel. They'll be doing short dives, which implies that they're on the gear as it's coming up to them. They're just being lazy and letting it come up to them. Although there is evidence as well that occasionally these animals are feeding on the bottom, both from observations in the toothfish fishery as well as last year's U.S. sablefish survey had a whale take that happened while the gear was soaking. They had a TDR on the gear, and it came up partway through the soak and then drifted back down. And then when they came back later and hauled it, it was on the gear. So we know that animal was feeding on the bottom. So if they shift to that, then this device will not work. So for the shrouds, these are some images of the shrouds here. We used commercial slinky pots, which are a collapsible pot that's being used by a lot of sablefish fishermen right now to avoid depredation. We cut one end out of it. We put a cap on the other end that would create water resistance to help it slide down that branch line. We deployed them with cameras in them so we could monitor their performance. And then we had snap gear on the branch lines that were different tensions, so that the closest ones to the shroud would slide first, and they'd all kind of clump up together so the shroud could cover up all the fish. It took a bunch of planning and logistics to figure out the best way to deploy these units without fouling everything, to get the right weighting and to keep the crew safe. And we had to adjust our original design plan from 3 shrouds and 3 controls to 2 and 2 with a blank in the middle, because this gear goes out rapid fire, and it was creating some real safety issues for the crew. But we also had to make more space in the gear to keep them safe. We also had to reduce the hook spacing on the branch line from 4 to 2 feet. We had 10 hooks per branch line, but now you've got 10 hooks over a 20-foot spacing, which is pretty tight spacing for halibut fishing, and made some challenges in encountering enough halibut. But overall, for the results, the variable strength snaps, as you can see in that last picture, they do cluster together as we desired. And the shrouds generally slide down to cover the hooks, but it's not unusual to have a little bit of snarling in that process. Overall, we had low catch rates in the final configuration, which was affected by that small effective footprint of 10 hooks over a 20-foot spacing. We also had a lot of hagfish, which tends to reduce your catch rate of anything. So we know the basic concept works, but there'd be quite a few logistical issues to sort out before scaling this up to a fishery level.
Low catch rates overall, or low relative to the control?
Overall,
How were they compared to the control? So the catch rate's so low that you
catch rates were so low that we can't get it.
can't really compare. Okay.
So the shuttle, this is an image of the shuttle. We had 2 shuttles with us, one as a backup in case we needed it. We only test fished the one though. It was equipped with cameras inside of it, looking both at the fish coming into the device and fish being released inside the device. We also had lights in there in case it was too dark. And there was a bit of a learning curve on how to attach or thread the unit onto the ground line. We had a blank piece of ground line specially set in the gear so that we would not be hauling fish up into the water column to attach the device. We want to keep the fish on the bottom and out of the way of prying eyes. But again, once you start doing this with fishermen, they quickly figure out how to do this quickly and efficiently. And what started as a kind of a 4-man operation turned very quickly into a 2-man operation. They were able to do it in a minute and a half, clip it onto the device and send it on its way. For results, we show that it can safely be used on small vessels. Having said that, there's still, I think, some shyness in the fleet. Like they see it and they're like, geez, that thing's really big. But again, if we can get proof of concept on this, the inventor and ourselves have ideas on how you could downsize this, make it collapsible, make it fold up, those sorts of things. So it's kind of less bulky, but certainly it can be used. We had similar catch rates between the control and the shuttle. You can see that in the first, I don't know how to make the mouse show up, but on the two graphs on the lower right, the one on the left shows the catch rates, numbers per skate, and then the size of those halibut on the right. So we had similar size fish being entrapped in the device and on the control. And so it worked pretty well for that. We also compared it on different species. So, long-nosed skate, another big fish that might, you think, get deflected, had similar catch rates both inside and out. Next phase of this, we secured a second round of funding, hoping to do similar work, but get more observations actually in the presence of depredating whales. We're looking to do 10 days of fishing and to do some further refinements to the attachment protocols for the shuttle itself, and looking at canyon and hook strength and do some more catch comparisons and species chain comparisons. We've been actively seeking a vessel to do this work in an area of either southern 4A edge or the 4B, where this problem is very predictable. We've been unable to secure a vessel for that this year. So right now we're considering asking for an extension to the granting organization to try to do it in 2025 with a bunch of modifications to make it more appealing to boats to do. We're competing right now with a whole lot of sablefish quota, and a lot of the guys just say, yeah, we're interested in doing it, but we have so much quota. Concerned about being able to give up 10 days of our season to go and do this work. So we're going to have to get a little bit creative, I think, on that, and probably be willing to expand it possibly to areas where there's not whales, just to further characterize the performance of the unit. So.
Can you test it on sablefish? And at the point of,
You can't.
do you need to do it on halibut right now?
For the Halibut Commission, we applied for it under that. But, so to that end, yes, we could test it on sablefish.
There are probably things you can work out,
Yeah,
general,
and so
and then be specific to halibut later.
right, and we did collect data on all the species that we caught, including sablefish. So we do have some data on that. Right now, a lot of the sablefish fleet is not that interested in the device because they've largely moved over to these slinky pots in the areas that they're encountering it. But now the whales are outsmarting that to some degree and turning them into a de facto pinata, where instead of getting a fish periodically, they're now ramming the slinky pot and pulling out several hundred pounds at once. They're working in teams doing that. So you're going to get the classic arms race of an increased, heavy duty coil, increased webbing, those sorts of things, which will probably end up leading to some sort of very solid device, very similar to this. But Greenland turbot in the freezer longline fleet, they've been leaving their quota in the water because they're having such a big problem with it. So that's another fleet we could try to target to see if there's interest in that. And again, Greenland turbot, we could scale pretty easily to some of the halibut metrics that we're interested in. So.
That there is whale depredation occasionally elsewhere, right? Not all the way out.
Right, there is. So I think
Can you be dynamic with it where
we can.
Okay.
Yeah. So we initially were resistant to that because we were really trying to get it for sure in an area where we were going to see whales.
But given the challenges we've had in securing a boat, I think we're going to have to go that route. And we could also go in an area that's a little more prone to sperm whale depredation. Hope that we see them. If we don't, we're still going to be able to characterize the performance, the units, the size of fish, the species that are coming into it, and some of those aspects that are certainly relevant, to the fishers.
I guess I was thinking something where you don't go unless they're encountering them. Like you set up a contract where it can be sort of activated once they encounter them. So once you know that that's going to be a good spot. Sounds trickier, but that way you're not.
I think we need to be
spending your
open.
time
Yeah,
on
I think we need
boats
to be open to all
with
those ideas and possibly to somehow combining it where they're landing their quota in that case, and we're getting scientific data off of it at the same time. So we could probably get creative that way. This is just a summary of the grants that have been involved in that project.
Great. Thank you, Claude.
Yep.
This concludes our presentation, presentation 09.
Joseph, are you going to talk about the non-lethal genetic-based method for aging?
Yeah, this is a project that was submitted to Alaska Sea Grant. Was communicated to us unofficially that the funding was awarded, but we still have not received the official confirmation. So we have not received the award yet, and I think it's because Alaska Sea Grant has had difficulties in getting the funding from the Department of Commerce.
We just had our Sea Grant awarded last week after having the same thing. So I think it's sort of
So
in
we're
process to the Sea Grants now.
That's correct. So we're waiting for Alaska Sea Grant to communicate to us the award, and we're also are in the process of requesting, trying to recruit a master student to work on the project, because the funding comes with stipend for a master student for 2 years for the duration of the project. And fortunately, what we have heard is that the beginning of the project, so the initiation date, can actually be moved to the actual date when the student will start. So we're looking to start this project hopefully in January of 2025. And that will run for 2 years.
And this is methylation.
That's correct. Yeah. So this was a project that involves the analysis of DNA methylation patterns that are associated with age and the use of specific models to create what's referred to as an epigenetic clone.
Yeah. I remember, did we hear about this before?
I think I mentioned that there was a submission, but because this was submitted exactly about a year ago in the spring, late spring or early summer of 2023. And it was in September. I think it was after the September SRB meeting when we found out that the reviews were highly positive. Unofficially, was communicated to us that the award, and then later on at the beginning of the year, in fact, you can see it on the Alaska Sea Grant page that the project is there, but we have not received the award.
I'm well aware of it.
So at least at this time is still in progress, and hopefully will allow us to start in January of 2025.
And how does this aging approach fit with the AI-based aging? Are you sort of pursuing both these avenues together?
Exactly. This was considered an alternative method for aging, with the advantage that this method can age fish without terminally killing them. So with pink lips, and it could be used for studies that are involving tagging of fish or non-sacrificing the fish. So far, there's, to my knowledge, there's about 7 to 9 species for which there are epigenetic clocks available. Okay, this is a relatively new technology. I think the first paper was published in zebrafish in, I want to say in 2017, I think.
Has it been attempted in any species and failed for some reason?
The failures, those are not published. So I can only speak to the ones that have been developed so far. I do not know of any failures so far. One of the first species was the Mediterranean sea bass, and then has been moved. And most recently, there's been work out of, I think it's the University of Florida. They published epigenetic logs for two Gulf of Mexico species. It's potentially useful. For instance, one of the species that we heard that NOAA is actually interested in is lingcod. Lingcod apparently is fairly hard to age in traditional methods, and this would be an alternative. So anyway, it looks like a promising method. Has different advantages over AI or other methods. Has also other disadvantages. It's more expensive.
What is the per sample cost?
That's that the actual the reagents, their price is hard to estimate right now how much it costs.
Because it's changing so rapidly.
It's changing rapidly. Yeah. And you get that is something that we're actually considering, is whether to use commercial reagent kits, or whether you can actually put together your own kits from scratch with significant savings. So that's something that we need to have to work out.
I guess my thought about this is that this is really cool scientifically, and I'm curious to know how this fits in the workflow for the aging going into the assessment or MSc.
Yep.
Because if it's redundant with another approach and more expensive,
So
but if it gets you something that you don't get otherwise, like ages from the commercial catch,
or from fish that are being tagged.
from fish
So
that's
we'll know the age at tagging,
Right.
which would be huge.
Yeah.
Also, any non-lethal sample.
Yeah,
So
I'm
that's
sure there are great use cases for it. It'd be cool
Yeah.
to see that articulated in the context of everything else.
This is a
and how
method that
efficient
would actually leverage the collection of genetic samples for genetic sexing, for genetic composition, as well as age in one single sample. And it would potentially open the door to biological information on the potential role of methylation, not just for aging, but for other processes. And methylation is one key factor in the adaptive mechanism, fast adaptive mechanism to environmental change. So that could be a field of research that could be potentially really interesting to get into. Yeah. So hopefully in next in the first meeting in 2025, in the June meeting, we'll be able to progress that project.
Brings us right pretty much on time here.
Ray, have a seat.
You can sit here.
We can get,
We
we
got
can
plenty of
bring one
room.
more chair here.
Yeah. Take those, whichever one. You just have to ask the presentation number. Is it 6?
Just have the presentation for paper 06, please.
Okay, good morning. Once again, we are at the part of the annual FIS design cycle and where we present some potential designs to the Scientific Review Board for your input. Things have been a little bit different this year. It feels like the cycle is an all-year cycle now where we're constantly designing new designs and churning out new maps on a weekly basis. So you get to see some of those maps in this presentation, get a sense of what we've been doing in the last few months. The presentation has two parts, but most of it is the design evaluation part. There's a small part on some model updates at the end. Okay, the usual review, summary, introduction. The FIS provides, it's the most important source of data on Pacific halibut. We use it for indices of density and abundance, numbers and weight per unit effort, used to estimate stock trends. I should thank Ian for providing a nice little introduction to this yesterday as well, and giving you a preview of some of the material that we're covering, so appreciate that. And important input into the stock assessment. Provides biological data for the stock assessment. We've had an annual FIS since 1993. Design was expanded in two phases. In the early years, from 1993 to 2000, it was expanded over time to include sampling in all regulatory areas. And then from 2011 to 2019, we further expanded into gaps in design and into deeper and shallow waters that haven't been covered. That led us to this full FIS grid on a 10 by 10 nautical mile grid, about 18 by 18 kilometers. And all the stations in orange are our FIS grid, 1,890 potential stations on that grid. We also highlight in this figure that we augment the data from the FIS with data from the particularly the NOAA Troll Survey in the Bering Sea, also some data from Alaska Department of Fish and Game in Northern Sound in most years. And those are included via calibration between the troll gear and our gear in a couple of years in which the two surveys overlapped. We can't sample those 1,890 stations in a single year. It would be logistically challenging and cost prohibitive. So we've been prioritizing sampling effort based on scientific needs, precise estimates of indices of abundance and stock distribution with low potential for bias. And you've seen much of that analysis in recent years. That would require often more frequent sampling in areas with higher variability. Long-term revenue neutrality is the secondary objective. And that means we increase effort in revenue positive areas to offset the cost of sampling low density habitat. And we potentially reduce effort in high cost areas to avoid large deficit. And we've been certainly doing that in the last couple of years. So summarizing those, primary objective, scientific one, affects station distribution, station counts, skates per station, revenue neutrality, logistics and cost. And then we have tertiary objectives, minimizing our impact on stock through our removals, assisting others in their data collection, particularly other agencies, and then meeting the policies of the commission, which made ad hoc design changes. So this is the timeline, or has been the timeline. We're in this period up until the SRB. We're working on designs for the next 3 years, with a focus on the design for the coming year. Following your input, we and any information we're getting from commissioners, particularly related to funding these days, we may make further changes to those designs. Commissioners will get the first formal look at the designs in September work meeting. You'll get another look soon after that. Then the data come in from the annual survey. We get to model those. We get information, we find information on costs from the annual survey in the middle of the year. What the price of halibut is doing, the cost of the survey is, cost of bait and stuff. Well, bait comes later. But those can help us refine our projections of costs for the subsequent year, 2025 in this case. And then at the interim meeting, it's expected that commissions will make a decision. Research Advisory Board did some input the week before. And in the period after that, there's plenty of room for the commission to make adjustments as they did in the last cycle based on their perceived need for sampling priorities and the availability of funding for what they and we wish to sample. Oh, and we're there. So from 20 to 24, in 2020, following the expansion, we brought in a rationalized FIST design process, and we presented designs in which we didn't sample the full suite of stations, but had our priorities based on sampling needs and scientific imperatives. And that involved random sampling in the core areas, 2B, 2C, 3A, 3B, where the bulk of the stock is, and sampling blocks of stations elsewhere, prioritized to maintain precise estimates in those regulatory areas with low potential for bias. In 2020, the FIS was reduced from the design that was initially approved due to COVID-19, and we only fished in the core areas of the stock. 2021 to 2022, the proposed design was largely implemented. There were some issues with lack of viable bids in some areas, and some parts of the design weren't completed for logistical reasons. But by and large, what we wanted to do from a scientific perspective was completed. 2023 and 2024, reduced designs have been implemented to lower costs. Little sampling has been undertaken outside the core areas in 2023 with no sampling in 4A, 4B, or 4CD, and minimal sampling in 2A last year. And we've had further reductions in 3A and 3B in 2024, but some sampling was added at the annual meeting to 4CDE, which you heard about yesterday in the context of using those samples for biological information. This was the implemented 2023 design. The dark orange circles in the Gulf of Alaska were the stations that we ourselves fished. The lighter orange circles in the Bering Sea were the stations successfully fished on the NIMS Troll survey, or the Alaska Department of Fish and Game survey with the denser stations up here in Norton Sound.
Just to clarify, when you say 4CD and E was sampled, are you talking about the trawl survey or the
Troll
FIS?
survey, yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
FIS didn't go.
Sorry, yeah, if I wasn't clear. Yeah, that was sampled by NOAA and Alaska Department of Fish and Game. We did not sample in the Bering Sea, but the bulk of the Bering Sea is covered by those surveys, so we still had a lot of information there. Yeah. The parts that we had planned but weren't able to fish are shown in the reddish color. We had proposed doing stations in the densest parts of 4A, 4B on the border here, but we didn't get any viable bids, likely because it was too small a region to be worth sampling. We were not able to sample the random selection of stations in this survey region, which I think is the Yakutat survey region. And you'll see randomly scattered points where, for whatever reason, the station we attempted to fish it, but it wasn't effective. Year loss and whale depredation and so on. But we successfully sampled 864 stations.
The NIMS trawl, that doesn't cost anything for FIS, right?
We haven't had a sampler on board the troll survey, which we pay for, so to get comprehensive information, but we don't have one this year. That's correct.
We worked out an agreement with them to get limited amount of data
So
without sending a person this year. But historically, we've usually put a person on that survey to collect additional samples.
Right. The key piece of information we need to use their data for space-time modeling is length. We need a length distribution. We need the lengths of each element in order to estimate weights and weight per unit effort or numbers. Yeah, to get the weight per unit effort indices. So we need counts and we need lengths for each, and we get that information from remnants, even if we don't have the sample report, they're give us 100% of the data.
That survey doesn't collect a large number of large halibut. So after the size calibration for the data, we don't get as much information on a per station basis from that survey as we would for our own survey.
So that was last year. Still fairly comprehensive coverage. This is this year. This is what was adopted with additional efficiencies, which we'll talk about in a moment. So it's a somewhat scaled back NIMS troll survey as well in the Bering Sea. They're not fishing the northern part of the Bering Sea this year, though we do anticipate Alaska Department of Fish and Game to sample the Northern Sound. I'm never entirely sure what they do or what they plan to do until I get the data. Sometimes they have an expanded survey, sometimes it's reduced. But we are sampling on the Bering Sea shelf edge, St. Matthew Island and the Pribilof Islands. This area of 3 contiguous charter regions on the 3B, 3A border, all of 2C and half of 2B, which are areas those are the areas that are most profitable for us.
You got bids out in Four
Yes,
Seasons,
we did. Yes,
so it's happening.
it's happening. Yep.
They're out there now.
We're out there, yeah.
I think their first day of fishing is either today or tomorrow.
All right.
So that's great because we haven't had data there since 2022. The commissioners prioritized that over an alternative, which was sampling about 60 stations, I think, on the 4A, 4B edge border here, where we haven't had 4B data there since 2021. That's right. And 4A data since 2023. But 2022, sorry. Yeah.
But you didn't get bids there last year when you tried
We
that.
didn't know, but this was, so we made it more stations. We had a minimum, last year, I think it was like 30 stations, but this we increased to 60, I think, something like that, and to make it more viable. But we didn't get a chance to get bids because the commissioners chose Four Seasons instead. Now, the added efficiencies, in order to reduce the loss that this design is projected to make, we considered a large number of potential efficiencies and moved forward with a couple of them, or a few of them. So this year, there's no oceanographic monitoring. And that's something that the stakeholders and ourselves were really keen to see go ahead, but it would have added a significant additional cost to the survey. So this is the first year we haven't had oceanographic monitoring, probably since 2008, I guess.
What is the cost of doing that?
It's,
Slow things down? Okay.
no, it's not that. It's the financial cost of maintaining and operating the water column profiles, which is, I don't remember the cost of it.
It's the servicing of the gear.
That's the main-
It's tens of thousands of dollars every year just to service the equipment.
And we have multiple units as
Yeah.
well, so this would have been over another $100,000, right? And as we mentioned, we're not staffing the troll surveys. And additional changes were made to the standard fish design, with the goal of improving revenue. So in particular, and somewhat controversially, I guess, we're allowing vessel captain stations, which the vessel captains can choose to fish up to 1/3 of their sets at a location that is optimal in terms of catch rates or revenue. So in a typical fishing day, they're fishing 3 or 4 stations, depending on how long the skates are. And so they can pick one of those stations and not fish it on the grid. They can find an optimal location in the vicinity to maximize catch. Now, this had a lot of discussion because internally and with commissioners and with stakeholders who were concerned that this was it compromised the quality of our data because it brings in the potential for bias, depending how you're managing that data. So nobody really wanted to do this from a scientific point of view. But it is projected to add a significant amount of revenue to help offset the cost of the survey. So the way we're managing this is with the space-time model. This is something you'd probably get away with 1 year, because so we're still going to be the way we get our predictions from the space-time model. We project at the actual station locations, not at wherever they're fishing on their offset stations. So projecting at the locations where they fished it or not. We do that every year. Where the set's ineffective, we still get a prediction at that station, even if there was no data. And so we have information not just from this year, we have information from last year and the years before. So having a one-off set that's not exactly on the spot that you wanted, but not directly using that in your and still projecting at the stations shouldn't have a big impact. We wouldn't expect it to have a big impact in a single year. We're hoping that the effect is negligible, but we're going to check. We're going to fit models with and without those skipper stations to see if there's any difference in the estimates obtained. If you were to keep doing this over time, then you would lose the signal from the stations that you're not fishing. You would get an overly optimistic view of what the underlying density is, and you would have a drift towards a higher overall catch rate. But I think in 1 year, this is something we can rationalize.
And importantly, we've only done this in charter regions where we're sampling 100% of the stations. And so if we end up finding evidence of bias, we can just take the skipper stations out. And we still will have plenty of information to create a relatively precise index based on only true survey stations.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention, this is only in 2B and 2C, which have not only been comprehensively sampled this year, but have been comprehensively sampled in past year. So whatever station is not being fished on the grid this time, it was fished last year, it was fished the year before. So we've got a good amount of information on whether that station is lower or higher or whatever than the average, regardless of whether they fish it this year.
Trying to justify in my head here, you're saying that you think these will catch a lot more halibut. You think that there won't be much bias.
That's right.
We
try to
seem to
justify
be in conflict, okay?
Oh, well, yeah, but I think the key thing is that the space-time modeling is not going to be predicting at that spot. So if they're fishing off, so here's what I hope happens. So they're going to be fishing a higher density station that's probably going to be a higher density spot. It's probably going to be in the vicinity of one or two of the other stations that they're also fishing, that also has higher density. So it's going to be just informing something that we already have some information on. So it's not going to be hugely influential on the spot that we're missing. What would be a concern is if it worked like this, that you've got this low density spot they're avoiding, just 3 or 4 miles away is a high density spot. And the model isn't picking up that fine scale change in density. It's estimating that spatial dependence is coarser. So then it would be informing the spot that we missed, saying that this year that spot's high. I haven't seen where they've been fishing. I haven't had that mapped out yet.
They've been doing more or less what you described.
Yeah. So
And importantly, this also, we did this also to make the bidding more appealing for the vessels, because they can take, if they have 2 stations close together and 1 far away, they can actually choose not to fish the far away one and fish 3 close together. And so far, we're getting some reasonably positive feedback. It took them a little bit of time to get used to the concept, but there actually does seem to be some benefit to reduce running time.
and so hopefully that was built into the bids when they did.
Hopefully.
And will you run the model with an extra term that you estimate for these choice stations, or will you just treat them?
No, they'll be data. They'll be part of the surface that we're trying to estimate. Right? It's just a different part of the surface. Like
Why not run them? Why not estimate a captain's choice offset?
I could do that. I mean, it's going to tell us. I mean, then, yep, sure. I mean, it can go in there. It won't change the predictions to have that in the model. It would just give us, I guess, quantify the ratio of catch rates from captain stations to non-captain stations.
Which could be useful, and if it is If it does seem like it's a constant offset or a constant relative, scalar, perhaps this could be expanded if it does seem. I mean, if you can deal with it statistically,
I think over time it would be a concern because we'd be missing, we would no longer be getting data at those low density spots, at the lowest density spots. And so whatever we collected in the past, it would just fade away. We have is an elevated.
right? I mean, I'm not saying like. Maybe offset that.
I don't know. I mean, this falls under preference sampling or something where, which is known to bring bias into your estimates.
I know I'm just trying to justify what I'm hearing from you, which
Yeah.
is that this is going to create bias, but it's not a big deal.
Well,
It's going to help.
what
It's
we're
going to help the
hoping
captains
is-
catch more fish.
The
But it's,
expectation is in 1 year that the bias is going to be minimal or negligible, but we can find out what it is. Um,
So
And we
I'm
don't
just
want to,
wondering why, like, why not just let them pick a station to make money at and just ignore that station? Why bother trying to include it in your data?
it's still information about what's out there. We're essentially estimating a service. Which is
Right,
the density
but
function.
you're gonna get a biased one that, yeah, I'm not sure I'm following the argument that it's not a big deal. If it's a one-off and you don't expect it to be a big deal, how much information can it possibly provide?
Fair enough. Yeah, probably not a lot. I mean, considering that the estimates in these areas are very precise anyway. And the station density is quite high. We expect spatial dependence out to 30 nautical miles, and the grid's only 10 nautical miles. It's probably you're right. Probably not a lot of extra information. And our proposal is usually first proposal is to do a randomized selection of stations. So we're leaving out almost half the stations anyway in any given year. So this is be fewer than that. Information is information. So I don't like throwing away.
I'm not sure about that.
Oh, well, okay, but I mean,
But if we do it with and without,
Yeah.
we've lost nothing by exploring what it means to include.
Sure.
And we are getting the biological information as well, which is actually a big benefit.
And if we don't include anything data-wise, then it'll be a very short-term activity. We won't be able to continue that on moving forward just because the two governments won't allow it to fish for fish sake.
yeah,
It'll
well,
have
we were
to be
just
a
hearing
data
that it's not a worry because it's only going to be a short-term activity. And you're
Wow.
saying, well, we should we should do this because.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying that that's why the commissioners are
Yeah.
hesitant at the moment. Unless there's
Yeah.
a data use, then it will be a short term.
so even if we wanted to, it sounds like they wouldn't.
Part of the data use is that you're able to do it. Like
Yeah.
these stations are supporting
Right.
a whole lot of other information. It's not, you may have to throw that data point out, but you've got a lot of other data points because you allowed them.
There's a lot of discussion around this, like, folks in 2C are concerned that we're relying on 2C to fund the rest of the survey. We are sampling more information than 2C needs for its own index in order to pay for areas that are losing money. So there's concern about that. This is another step in the direction.
Yeah, well, it is a coast-wide stock. It's a shared stock. I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
That argument kind of doesn't hold a lot of weight.
Example of
Well,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's,
I know, and this movement from 2C imports fish from other areas as well. I don't want to get into that, but there's a perception.
perception of local ownership that doesn't really. Anyway, continue.
Okay, the other efficiency, less controversial perhaps, is the use of pink salmon baits on 50% of the sets. Pink salmon has in recent years been quite a bit cheaper than the chunk salmon that we've used since 1993 consistently. I think chunk salmon came down in price though, didn't it? So it was not the benefit that we thought it was going to be. There's also a concern that pink salmon, based on our data from our 2012 date comparison, which included pink salmon coast-wide, that the catch rates of pink salmon may be less than chunk salmon, so it may wash out in terms of its benefit. We'll find out. This is the way we're fishing this is that this is essentially alternating on the red with chum salmon. So we're going to have a really nice clean comparison between the two baits throughout the survey this year.
You'll estimate
We'll estimate it
return.
exactly. Yep. And then when we do the predictions, we'll predict if everyone is fished using chum salmon.
And that may not save us much money this year, but in the long term, we expect that. Including pink salmon could save us a fair amount.
We're planning to do it again in 2025.
On average, over the last number of years, pink salmon is considerably cheaper than chum salmon.
and estimating an additional term of the model.
No, we'll have a very, very good information. And we've done it before with, we've had recent year comparison studies where we've compared snap and fixed hook gear because we're using now snap vessels in the survey. I don't know if we're moving into this year or not. But we did have them last year, and so now we estimate that within the model and adjustment in the production. Okay, 25 to 27. So as I mentioned, in recent years, we fished a random selection of stations in the core of the stock, although in the last couple of years, it hasn't necessarily worked out that way as we increased station density to the maximum, or that increased revenue in much of the core. And this method was chosen in 2019 over a proposal to instead fish a selection of charter regions as blocks of stations. You may remember that because at the interim meeting, a lot of people really did not like that proposal to have blocks of stations. Well, we've come full circle, and now that's what we're going to be doing again. So in September 2023, the Commission directed us to evaluate potential block designs for future sampling, the motivation being that having tight unit of stations rather than randomized collection of stations would improve efficiency of the operation, reduce running time between stations, and bring costs down, bring the cost of fitting down the station. So we evaluated out of the many designs and possibilities we looked at last year, we evaluated several block designs, and they're being repackaged for you today. One referred to as the base block design, which is base design we think is sufficient to meet our scientific needs. And we evaluated the Commission for consideration for 24 to 26 and presented here for 1 year ahead, as the Commission did not take it up for 2024. Prioritizes some annual sampling in each biological region for the stock assessment. So Ian has data from all regions, including 4B each year. Ensures all charter regions in the core of the stock are sampled over a 3-year period. So this is a rotating design, as the last point says. And coverage in other areas is prioritized to minimize bias potential and maintain CVs. It used to be our CV target was 15% or below. Commissioners have asked us to relax that to 25% less by regulatory area. That still allows precise estimation at the larger unit, like a region or coastal. You'll see that in a bit. So this would be a rotating design. We would have comprehensive coverage in the core of the stock over a 3-year period, and prioritize coverage as we have been doing in the remainder of the stock over a longer period.
Just to remind me of the 15% CV target previously, that was mostly driven by the Commissioner's desire to allocate TCU regionally.
Yeah, to have precise information at that management unit level.
Right, that's not driven by the stock assessment needs, right?
No, because the stock assessment is using all of that.
Yeah, right.
It's yeah, hopefully you can see these. I've tried to put them all together so you can blink your eyes from 1 year to the next. But this is 25, 26, and 27 designs. And so in 2025, the design proposal is this. So we've got start at the bottom. Not having fished 2A in 2024, having fished only a tiny part of 2A in 2023, This will fish the priority areas in 2A in 2025. The bulk of the stock is in North Washington coast and Central Oregon coasts. It will fish half of 2B, the northern half in this case, the same part we're doing this year, and 2/3 of 2C. And we're using charter regions as a unit of convenience here, and 2C has 3 charter regions, so fishing 2 out of 3 is kind of the minimum you can do there. Noting that this is an area that makes us money, and 50% of the 8 charter regions in 3A, 2 out of the 5 in 3B, and then we've prioritized these parts of 4A and 4B. This is that at least we haven't seen what's out here since 2019 in Western 4B, but all the information says that most of the fish are here, and we haven't sampled that since 2021. So we're losing our signal on what's going on 4B, and we really need to get some information where it's most important, and that's in the east. 4A, we could have made 1 or 2 choices here, but we haven't sampled the southeastern part of 4A since 2019. And so we last sampled the western part in 2022. So we prioritize that for 2024. There's an argument to be made that we should go here instead, but this is what we're putting forward for now. There was some information, some indication from commercial data that maybe densities were increasing in this part of the stock, but we haven't been there for 5 years.
Ray, I know this is somewhat hard to predict, but do you think you'll be able to get bids for 4B? Is it better to project forward, assuming that doesn't actually happen?
We got bids in 2021. We got bids in 2022 in an area that was even less appealing than that. So in recent years, we've got bids. I think when we tried to get a bid for the far west, it just was insanely expensive. In 2022, it was supposed to be coupled with the central part here. So we expect to get bids, and we did all right on the edge this year. So I think we're cautiously optimistic for that part of 4B. It's a large number of stations, 70-something stations, so it's not like the 30 we tried to do in 2023. So I think I'm hopeful.
But 2027, the far western part of 4B, that's less likely.
Yeah. I mean, we really like to get it because we haven't seen it since 2019. There's not a lot of commercial activity there, so it's almost a blank slate now for us, and it's a big part of why there's high uncertainty in that region. It's not just a regulatory area for B; it's a biological region, so it's got elevated importance for assessment and management because of that. So I don't know. I always hope things get better. And this is 2 years, 3 years away.
For sure. I just think it's probably better to do projections based on realistic assumptions, so that the commissioners can see the uncertainty that's actually not the uncertainty that will happen if this very unlikely sampling design actually gets built.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to depend on priorities as well. We may get a high bid here, but maybe the commissioners think, well, we haven't seen this for so long, we're going to give you the leeway to accept that high bid. So I don't think at this point we could say it's unrealistic.
I would also say that if there was a way that they could project out a 3-year plan like this, so knowing in 2027 we are going to be going to the western end of 4B, vessels could maybe plan for that. Be like, oh yeah, maybe I could bid for that, knowing that they're going to go there in 2 years or 3 years.
And that's one of the main reasons we give 3-year ahead things, even though what we're putting here for 2026 doesn't look like a lot like what we had for 2026 last year. It gives some ability for stakeholders and commission to anticipate, to see what our plan is, but also to, as Colin said, to maybe think ahead.
Yeah, I'm not saying don't project forward the designs, but you calculate the expected CVs.
Yeah.
Consider that the designs, I mean, if there are designs that you think are super unlikely to be fully realized, you can make a realistic assumption in the CV calculations.
I think So this is not the only design we have. So you'll see alternative designs that are more pessimistic in terms of our resources coming from. We are realists as well. We know what's been happening in the last couple of years. But this, you can see how this fills the entire core of the stock over a 3-year period, with really only 3B being the one that needs 3 years to be sampled, while most of the rest of the stock is covered. Sometimes in a longer term, you don't see the northern shelf edge over this 3-year span, but it would in the Bering Sea, but it would come in 2028 or 2029, or it could come earlier depending on commission priorities. So that design is, sorry,
Take a break.
do we want to take a break? I only just started, but yeah, if people want to take a break, that's a good place to take it.
I was thinking 10:30, but
Okay, that's good.
Okay, then we'll probably get through this part of the presentation. Recognizing that such a design is projected to make a large loss, and over $1.5 million, as you'll see soon, based on current costs. We also looked at designs that reduce those losses. So so we've got 2 designs: the core block design. Ian mentioned both of them yesterday as well, which maintain
Sorry, is that 1 million per year?
$1.5 million per year loss. Yes.
And that was the directive from the commission for us to evaluate a design that was sustainable at that level of supplementary funding.
Right.
So that was a kind of a requested design. What would you guys want if this is what you had?
Yeah.
That's why we started there, as opposed to in previous years where we've started with, what would you want in a perfect world? Let's not even bother with that one. Sure, let's cut right to this design as the first step.
Right, which is why we see relaxed CV targets and so on. So the core block design would maintain the same rotating block coverage in the core, but remove sampling outside the core areas. Essentially, something a bit better than what we're doing in 2024 without 4CD. So we're scaling back to where the bulk of the stock is, and in order to reduce losses. And the reduced core would still sample only in the core, but reduce the number of charter regions each year that we're sampling to reduce those losses further. So while more profitable charter regions will vary over time, these designs are intended to be representative of similar low coverage designs. We're not saying this is exactly what we should go forward with it in different scenarios, but it gives you a sense of the type of coverage that we could undertake and the associated costs. So this is the core block design. It's what you saw on the previous slide, but with no sampling outside of 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B. Not too dissimilar to what we're doing this year. And the reduced core design would actually, is essentially what we are doing this year, but with no 4CD sample. So sampling the most profitable parts of 2C and 2B, and the least loss-making parts of 3A and 3B. So what if we had 2024 all over again, and we had to do it for 3 more years? What would that look like? Or equivalent coverage. If we were in that situation where the commissioners could not find any supplementary funding, and we needed to minimize losses, recognizing that not doing a survey results in a larger loss than fishing 2B and 2C because of fixed costs in the office and so on.
Just for reference, back up to the core design, roughly 70% of the biomass is in the core over the last few years. So although it looks like a lot of geography that wouldn't be sampled, it really only represents about a third of the stock. And that's why we sort of, when we have to drop back, we drop back to the core because it's the smallest geographic region that still represents the largest amount of biomass.
So it does put some constraint on the bias in the overall estimate for the coastal. Okay, now we looked at. Sorry.
So this reduced core one, this is it every year for the next.
Or equivalent. right? Yeah, yeah. If we might have updated projections on how profitable different regions, charter regions will be. I'm not sure where that information would come from if we're going fishing them, but so there may be variation in which regions we're fishing, but that would essentially be the number of stations. No variation. Yeah, we'll talk about why that's. We really don't want to do this. This is not what we want. For scientific needs, it's terrible. But if we find ourselves in a highly constrained financial situation, like this year, some information is better than nothing. As I mentioned, fishing a survey does less money than not fishing a survey.
And this one would require no supplemental funding.
Well, it depends. This year we had this year we're essentially fishing this, but we had to make those additional efficiencies. But we're also making a slight loss, projected to make a slight loss because of additional costs. So
But this one here, as written,
you'll see. You'll see the
Okay,
cost
sorry.
projection. Sorry. I think it's still projected to make a small loss, but net probably.
It's also very early to look at cost projections, so we don't actually have any of the actual costs and revenues for this season yet, which we'll have before we finalize this design. So we're way ahead of the actual information,
Exactly.
but we want to give you guys an update now in June rather than just waiting until September when we have the in-season information, but it's already getting kind of late in the year.
so just to forget when it is that we endorse these things. Is that this meeting?
Well, it used to be, but I don't know.
We complained about it.
Well,
We're
you
endorsing things that had no intention of being implemented. So
exactly. So I'm not sure you need. I don't even know if you need to endorse a particular design anymore, but rather choose your scientific views on the merits of the different possibilities.
Yeah.
That would inform the commission's decision, I think. Yeah, so the idea of bringing this forward with very preliminary cost projections, you can see some more perhaps realistic alternatives that in different circumstances, in the absence of supplemental funding, are more likely to go ahead than the base block design.
And I would also add the impact that these reductions have on our ability to collect biological samples and monitor the population. The environmental monitoring was suspended this year. That is a gap in our environmental data collection and biological collection. Colin was indicating that we have 2022, 2023, 2024 data for maturity, but there's other projects, genetics, that are going to be severely impacted by the reduced footprint of this.
So we projected coefficients of variation for all of these designs, for all areas, biological regions, coastwide. And so the base block design still maintains low CVs in the core of the stock. Depending on year, still maintains them at 15% or less. Outside of the core of the stock, 2A, 4A, 4B, it keeps them within that 25% relaxed target. 4CE, because of the NEMS troll survey, is still precisely estimated. And that's fairly consistent from year to year. Some variation depending on which parts of the areas outside the core we target, but over that 3-year period, we're maintaining precise estimates. And because of the rotating nature of the design, bias will be kept to a minimum in any given year. And so by biological region, we've got precise estimates and coastwide likewise. The core block design maintain things in the core, so the CVs are unchanged, but it removes sampling from outside the core. So for 4A, we still have some information coming from the troll survey, adjacent troll survey, and adjacent stations in 3B. So there's a little bit of information there. 4B, we have nothing. 2A, maybe a tiny bit of information from the southern part of 2B, but otherwise essentially nothing. And so the CVs quickly increase over time in those areas, more slowly in 4A. Still maintaining good CVs by region, except for 4B, but you see they're starting to grow over time, and that would continue as we don't sample outside the core in region 4. And likewise, coastwide, the CV will slowly creep up. And that increase is faster when we're doing the reduced core. CVs in 3B now start to increase beyond 25% in the final year, up to 15% in 3A. 2C and 2B maintain good coverage even in the reduced core design because those profitable areas have been historically the most profitable. But the regional CVs are trending upwards because there are parts of even 3A and 3B that we don't sample at all in this design. So those ones, information there is lacking. And the coastwide CV is creeping up and will continue to do so if we move this further forward.
How reduced would it have to be? Coastwide to get up to 15%.
It would, well, because of the space-time model, it's information from past years, but you run this 3 or 4 more, I think it'll get there. Yeah. Remember, we're still fishing a lot of stations, numerically, just they're compact, so the information is not the effective number of stations. It's much less than the numerical number of stations.
Lack of biological data would kill us before the CV index.
Yeah.
Yeah. What way?
Well, we wouldn't know about incoming year classes. So we wouldn't, our ability to predict what was going to happen in upcoming years would be poor.
You're still collecting biological information on where you're sampling.
But it would only represent a tiny piece of the coast. Everything
But
went pretty.
you said 70% of the biomass. You're
Not
sampling.
here, though. No, this is no longer 70% of the biomass. This is,
But you still have fishery age composition. The entire coast.
Yeah, but that tells us very little about fish less than about 10 years old. It would be the incoming year classes that we would see information about. So we would.
I mean, you're eventually going to learn about those incoming year classes. I mean, what you don't manage. Maybe that's one of the things that the commissioners use to decisions, but you're not really dependent on incoming year classes.
Historically not, but currently we are more so because we have just been through this period of 6 4-year classes in a row. So we have really 1.5 decent year classes in the water right now. Really waiting for another one. 2006 to 2011 being poor recruitment, we're in a somewhat unique situation because we have far less balance across a number of year classes in the stock now. So this is like the worst time to be doing this. 10 years ago would have been fine for 5 years because we had a bunch of year classes in the water that were all churned together. But right now it's a bit different.
Right, the way you showed it, there is the CVs in 2025 after 2027 sampling.
no, these are the 20, no, sorry, it's on the bottom, it's for the terminal year of the time series. So each time we fitted a model, hopefully it's clear in the document that we fitted this sequentially. We fitted a model fully including 2025 as that was the terminal year, and that's what that CV represents.
Okay.
And 2026, we added that, and that represents each time this is the terminal year of the time series. So it's the worst case because the terminal year is generally the worst.
Yep.
And that's the one they're making management decisions based on.
Exactly, that was going to be my
Yep.
point that.
Yeah, I know in the past I would do 3-year projection and then I'd do just next year so you could see what next year is the terminal year
Yeah.
look like. But this time I did it. There was a lot of models.
Right, I remember that in the past,
Yeah.
these were
Yeah,
sort of
that's right. So
optimistic. They were the CV we would
it
achieve
would be revised downwards because
years later.
yeah, exactly. So
But I also needed the 3rd year out
yeah.
for the assessment simulations. as well.
Right, yeah. Okay.
So
Eventually, those will go down a bit once they.
they would, but then past the point of making the in your management decision.
Yeah.
Except for when you're not sampling, the ones that never get sampled. Those evaluation potential design. So the base block design projected terminal CVs of less than 25% for areas, 15% or less for the core. All biological region CVs except 4B projected below 10%. Coastwide CV projected to be 4% in all years. This design is projected to maintain precise estimates of indices of density and abundance across the range of the stock. By rotating the sample blocks, almost all fish stations are sampled within a 5-year period, 2 to 3 years in the core, resulting in a low risk of large bias in estimates of trend and stock distribution. We're never too far away from sampling any given part of the stock.
We would be happy with this design.
We would be happy with this. We could live with this. Yep, absolutely. And it's essentially what we proposed in 2019. Core block design projected terminal year CVs of 15% or less in the core, so still doing all right there. CVs rapidly increasing for 2A, 4A, and 4B by 2027. Also leads to increasing CVs in biological regions 4B and 4A, 4 and 4B. This design is not projected to maintain precise estimates of indices of density and abundance outside the core. With a large proportion of the stock unsampled in 25 to 27, the risk of bias also increases over time in unsampled areas and regions, as well as coast-wide. And bias expected in age composition information, as Ian mentioned, as well as stock trend and distribution estimation. Yes.
Have you thought about applying the space-time model to the age composition? Wouldn't that deal with some of this issue?
Yep. We have thought about that.
Biological sampling?
As far as I know, nobody's tried to do geostatistical composition expansion for 25 ages and 2 sexes at the same time. There's a couple of applications. I think the biggest one, Jim Dorson and Melissa Haltuck did one for Linkod, but they combined the 2 sexes, which is interesting because that's a sex-specific model, so they threw that information away. But this would be the most complicated approach that I'm aware of. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but it may be something we have to do at some point if we end up with sparse designs on a continued basis.
Reduced core, summarizing again, projected terminal years CV 10% or less in 2B and 2C only. CVs increasing in 3A and 3B due to limited sampling, rapidly increasing in other areas, steadily increasing CVs for biological regions except and coastwide except region 2. Design is not projected to maintain precise estimates of indices of density and abundance outside of region 2. Very high risk of bias in coastwide and regional estimates due to very large unsampled proportion of the stock. And also, again, bias expected in age composition information. Now, as far as costs, they're all loss-making designs, and none of these are insignificant losses. So we've had to make a lot of assumptions projecting this far forward, but the designs are optimized for number of skates with 4, 6, or 8 skate sets used depending on projected catch rates and bait costs. You know, in the areas where we make the most money, we fish 8 skates. In other areas, we reduce it. 2025 Pacific halibut price and catch rates, we're assuming they decline per year, 5%, from those used to develop the 2024 design. We're using chumman and pink salmon bait on 50% of the stations. No skipper stations in this design. So depending how this goes, maybe it's something we could bring back on an infrequent basis, a regular basis, but not every year. So projected, there should be a minus sign in this one, obviously, it's in red, but these are all projected losses. Got $1.5 million with the CCAT, the oceanographic monitoring. You can see it's projected to cost an extra $135,000. And this design, the cost is less because the difference is less because it's less coverage. Fewer units need to be maintained, used. But given the reduced core design at today's projected costs, and he's still projected to lose $500,000. But these will be refined as we get information from this year. But projecting 2-3 years out is a pretty unreliable endeavor. Okay, there's a lot on this. I'll quickly read through it. It brings up, I think, mainly points you has brought up already. It's mostly summarizing material that is in the report. So depending on the level of available supplementary funding and commission priorities during the interim meeting and annual meeting process, we can anticipate adopted FIS designs for 2025 to differ in spatial scope from the base block design. If they do have $1.5 million on hand, well, great. That's a design we expect to be able to implement in full. And that is our hope that somehow the work to secure supplementary funding is successful. Like the adopted 2024 FIS design, the core and reduced designs will result in less information for the stock assessment and management supporting calculations than in the years prior to 2024. Ian can expand on any of these points. They're his points. But the increased uncertainty in the index of abundance is likely to cause the assessment model to rely more heavily on the commercial data. Commercial index, limited biological information from biological region 3 makes it unclear whether the stock assessment will detect a major change in year class abundance. Basic stock assessment methods can remain unchanged, but a greater portion of the uncertainty in trend and demographics will not be quantified due to missing FIS data from a large fraction of the stock's range. Implications for the assessment would be of increasing concern if the core block or reduced core designs were implemented beyond 2025 due to increasing uncertainty and risk of bias in stock trend estimates and the unrepresentativeness of the biological samples. Reduced stakeholder confidence in the FIS results and the aggregate scientific information from the stock assessment, which was evident in our discussions at the annual meeting process this year, and will result from FIS designs that do not fully inform stock distribution with annual sampling in all regulatory areas. Stakeholders have a lot of faith in our survey. It's one of the best surveys in the world. And I think they've increasingly appreciated that in recent years. The more recent years that I worked here, it was a lot of doubts in the early years that I'm in, like part of the first decade of the century. But I think there's increasing faith in the data that's coming from this design. And how informative it is to the state of the stock and information for the stock assessment. So there was a lot of discussion in the compromise to make this effective, the quality of the information that resulted from those data.
It's a tough problem in terms of communicating uncertainty. I mean, yes, it's less reliable, but only usually so. I wonder if, sort of by raising the alarm that these reduced designs increase CVs, we've somehow given them the impression that this is no longer a reliable time series. Even with the CVs we have, it's certainly better than the surveys all around.
Yeah. Some of the concerns came from areas like 2A, where there's essentially very little information to inform their management discussions among tribal units or the agencies down there. They're very concerned about the loss of data down there. Areas like 4A and 4B, where again, their CVs blow up, but they understand that we don't have a survey there, then we don't really know what the trend is in there. And so we're still trying to allocate to those commissions, still trying to allocate to those areas based on almost no information. So
can I just pause this?
yes.
We were scheduled to take a break at 10:30. Maybe we can just take a break till 12 minutes until 10 minutes before 11. And we'll just come back because I think we have some things to talk about here.
This was the last slide anyway, which is just noting that I do ask you to endorse the design, but what you wish with that.
There it is. Okay, so 12-minute break.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. Let's just pick up where we left off there. So one of the things that is there any just spitballing here, but rotating through for example, a base core reduced design, like not, I mean, the base one, for example, is 1.5 million loss per year, but if you cycle of cycling through them seems like it might. One of these two.
So this is the core design, no sampling outside of the core that's cycling through this, rotating through this, the charter regions. So it does the same as the base block. Both this and the base block design get that rotating sampling in the four regions, the difference being only sampling.
So if you started with essentially going high effort, medium effort, low effort, high effort, medium effort, low effort, in that kind of cycle, rather than this is like the same effort, just rotating.
Right, and we did actually look at something different in the designs to commissioners last year. One of the options was, instead of having something that's 4 out of the 8 areas in 3A, we did 2 out of the 8 areas in 3A each year. And it's cycled through over a 4-year period, if that's the kind of thing you're suggesting. The effort got reduced from, this is the same method as the base block design, but we did explore a design which sort of half the effort each year. We did each year. So it took longer to cover the parts of the core. Instead of 3 years, it would do it. So the potential for bias is higher each year because you're only sampling 25% of 3A, and we keep the areas, the charter regions together because it makes it easier getting bids on. So you've got one corner of 3A fished, and who knows what's going on in the other. The rest of it, and some of that's not going to be fished for 3 years. So I didn't bring that one forward here. Don't remember what it did to costs, but it was one of the. Yeah, we didn't like it.
It's not an issue for this group, but what are the license fees? There's like 1,000 vessels in this licenses. They're in this fishery.
Now, they already, in Alaska, they already pay a fish tax to support the observer program. The logistics of us being involved.
Well, you don't do the licensing, right? DFO and everything else for no licensing, but
Even in 2A, where we used to do licenses, we also give license, like this would be at no cost.
Right.
The licenses that we used to do up to like 2 years ago in 2A, they would be at no cost for the licensing of a vessel.
Ray, I'm curious why the reduced core ends up losing so much money. I thought that was money making.
How many parts of it I'm going to make? So look at this one. We could expect to make money in 2C and 2B. Now, even in 2024, we were fishing 3 of the charter regions here. I believe that they're not necessarily money making, but their losses are not sufficient to large enough to offset the profit made in elsewhere. So it's net revenue neutral, but that doesn't mean that each individual part is profitable.
No, but if you go to the costs,
Yeah.
cost estimates.
Right. So it's a big,
core
that's a
have
big
costed
difference.
so much.
Yeah. Because we're still losing money on most of those charter regions in 3B and 3A.
You decided not to add more stations in the money making.
That would be something those would be the kind of things that we would consider on a year-to-year basis. If the commissioners. I mean, it's usually part of our process is adding more stations in the property. So I think there was a desire to see something that didn't put all the effort into 2C to make money each year. So something that would not 100% 2C is what they wanted to see. What would the resulting loss be if we? So we are leaving some money on the table by not sampling all three regions in 2C, not sampling the northern part of 2B every year. There are ways to bring the cost down if we get the flexibility.
But at this stage, it's really too early to start doing that because we don't even have this year's tax rates yet.
Right.
So we would be doing that after we get this year's data.
I guess that sounds like there's an additional survey objective, which is to minimize harvest in 2C.
It's sort of, it's been talked about, but it's now sort of, I think the commissioners did ask us not to do that. Right?
Well, it's our second objective for our survey, which is to minimize the removals from the stock to a degree possible. So we would
tertiary.
always reduce the skates and the projected catch as far as we can and still pay for the survey.
You anticipate continuing decline in prices, or is that just a safety?
It's a reasonable precaution.
Is it settled out or?
Still going out?
It's just mixed. It's just so mixed. Some places are quite a bit less than what we projected, even though we projected, or it's just not predictable.
Did we project a decline for 2024? Did we get optimistic and say it wasn't going to change in the projection?
This year we said it would be at zero change.
Yeah, because we thought last year was bad.
We were hoping it would be optimistic. It would be a zero change.
Yeah.
That's less.
That's partly why these look a little bit worse than last year because of that. Projecting a price drop versus flat last year.
Yeah, whereas the reduced call based on the projections that we made for the beginning of this year, we would have been lower $600,000.
What are the consequences of skipping a year? Logistically, I mean, statistically, I mean,
It's more expensive to not sample than to sample a small revenue near neutral. We have a lot of fixed costs that don't go away if we don't survey. Actually, doing a small survey is better than doing a survey at all.
So we have
On data
style.
so could you put a design option that is no survey? Show what the loss would be for that?
Yeah.
Okay. A little bit of a reference to say that last year.
The commissioners asked us about that too. There was some interest. I think we explained how the costs go.
It's not very interesting to look at on the map.
I mean, for two.
All purple dots.
Have my one. So what is this? Probably $200 million fishery. Was that percentage wise? You know?
That's really our argument that we should be looking in the long term for a base level of supplementary funding that allows us to do the minimum we need, regardless of the conditions.
Or yeah.
And then we can expand and contract extra stuff, but we should be able to get a baseline that sort of keeps us in business.
Or
Without having-
index, like a.
We already do that for Alaska, for example. So maximum 3% cost recovery for post IFQ expenses. So we use that part of that to fund up what checkups
Which is independent of this.
independent. So
It's like it's all free.
Fraction
Entire
of
survey and
the
everything is
TCUY
free.
is the survey.
2 to 5% in most years.
So it's like a 2 to 5% tax.
For the.
We catch about 2 to 4% of the conversion. In recent years, it didn't used to be that.
Which is foregone catch for them.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, it's foregone catch for somebody, not necessarily in the
Yeah,
area.
it's
that we
foregone
find.
catch at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd probably be forced to catch a lot less if you didn't have this going
Oh,
on.
yeah.
You have to be
Because
so
conservative
conservative.
buffers. And that was the question from the US Observer, right?
Yeah,
How does that pan out in terms of foregone catch? Because you have to be more precautionary when the FIS is less precise.
so I mean, you could actually calculate what the value of this whole survey is. I'm sure it's more, this is not reflecting.
I wonder, I mean, given that they seem to be thinking along these lines, whether it's worth pursuing some kind of analysis that takes some of these designs through the MSC and says, in order to achieve the same risk of fishing, same risk of everything else, how much less is the TCEY for a
Yeah.
reduced design? It's a lot of work to do something like that, but it might be useful to do once to sort of put to rest the idea that this survey is expensive.
Well, it also
It
helps,
might not be expensive at all compared to backing off on the harvest because of the additional uncertainty.
yeah,
But it might,
somebody's
I
not
don't- I
listening.
really don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody's not getting the message of what the value of this thing is. They're just looking at these numbers. Being, well, we don't want to pay that, but. Doesn't show, doesn't make the case for what you're asking for. You're just saying, well, we need this much, but you're not seeing beyond these numbers as to what you're getting.
Particular the cost difference without seed, it's not much.
Yeah, where is that oceanographic data used? Used in the assessment? No, you just got the,
We have used it to help understand the changes in the survey. So in particular, for example, in 2A where the oxygen events are below the dissolved oxygen and seeing effects on catch rates in the survey, then we understand what's driving. If we don't get the oceanographic data, we can sure less clear perhaps when they're temperature related. It's like the warm blow in the Gulf of Alaska a few years ago, which didn't seem to have such a large impact on Pacific halibut. But we had that data to go with our stations to help us understand it, and also long-term issues. Formally done a lot of that, but I mean, that data collection goes back to 2009. To really change. And there's a lot of support. It was a continuous series until.
There are a lot of potential associations, environmental associations that are in our plans moving forward.
Yeah.
That are definitely going to be impacted. I mean, we mentioned, for instance, the effects of temperature on linking temperature with the maturity schedules region-wise. That's one example, but a number of biological processes can be linked with the environmental parameters that we're collecting. We're not only collecting temperature, we're collecting salinity, chlorophyll, and oxygen along the water column, the entire water.
Yeah, so I wonder about that. I mean, alternative would be to just put sensors down in the gear to get the bottom conditions. That's super cheap.
We lose our gear
Oh,
with it occasionally. So putting it down on the gear every time to put our,
you lose the whole
we
thing.
could do temperature. Chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen, pH, salinity, those things sensors become.
And this is equipment that we already have. We have 14 storage. This is just maintenance costs. So the investment has already been there.
And it's effectively what we do with the CCATs. We at the beginning of the fallback of the CCAT, test this, the water right where the gear is, and then proceed. It's just a little bit safer than putting it directly on the gear. Although we still lose a CCAT occasionally.
What kind of a job would it be to do what we were just talking about, to run this through assessment, MSE, and look at how much you'd have to buffer for different scenarios?
Well, that's sort of what we're embarking on already. This design simulation study, I think. It's Ray's already provided CVs that we'll then plug into the assessment and get a feeling for how the assessment, how that uncertainty changes, and then bring that uncertainty into the MSE. The timeline that I've presented to the commissioners on that work is assessment work will be this summer and to the fall. I'm not sure, that will come back to the SRB in September. And then we'll start on the MSE stuff. And it may not be, well, the SRB would see the MSE results next June. I'm not sure if the commission would see any preview of those results at the January end.
So it'd be really nice for the commission to see those results integrated into this.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
the cost is actually the cost.
The value.
Yeah.
So we should request to see those results for September.
I mean,
Request preliminary results? I think there's maybe some. results coming out.
I'm hoping to have the assessment simulations.
so that's the thing. It's like I could do some simulations, but I don't know how to plug in how the assessments affected what's into the MSE. And I think that's going to be the real critical thing. And what's the estimation error? How did that change?
I mean, can you bracket that and move it?
Yeah.
Through the MSC?
Yeah, and I've done that. Last year I did that, and it was more of a proof of concept that we could do this in the MSD, and I did 3 different potential designs and CVs, but it wasn't fully implemented. But we could take a look at some preliminary stuff and from the assessment simulations and then start trying to bracket it and get some preliminary MSC results for the SRB to look at. Then that might help have the SRB recommend what goes to the commission and what I do further work on before the annual meeting.
I mean, it seems not unlikely that the base block design is way cheaper than the core block reduced block because of that, because of the effect of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And you'd hate to give the commission these numbers when that's not actually done.
Mhm.
It's, they're business people, right? So they understand that
Yeah.
investment sometimes pays more than sometimes there's a positive return on investment.
Right.
This is probably one of those cases.
One factor that it's been mentioned today, but something I've been thinking about that is brought into the management process and we're not investigating with the MSD is the distribution aspect of it. And those negotiations and the decision-making process, what data are they using to make those decisions? And I think stock distribution comes into those discussions. The conference board is always looking at stock distribution. This is where most of the biomass is. I'm not seeing a change. We didn't have a survey in our area. That's not changed the quota. So that might be a part that we're not really able to characterize the value of the survey in the decision-making process.
But you can qualitatively say your job is going to get harder.
For sure. Yeah, this is the information
More
you're
and more
not
likely
going to have.
to impasses and all these other things.
Yeah, just seeing those CVs by regulatory area or even the region and how much they increase. It's like 4B. How are you going to make decisions on what to do in 4B if your CV is 50%?
Do you think 15%?
50.
50. I was going to say 50 to.
15's fine. I can live with 15.
Yeah.
50, not so good.
Do you think they have a good understanding of what that means? 50% CV, 50% CV. In terms of like, I wonder if it's worthwhile, like
Yeah.
showing a time series, true value, and
Yeah.
and the uncertainty with 15 and 50% CVs.
So Ray actually provided a nice example for the commission last year or the year before, where he showed the confidence interval, and then he said, and what this means is it could be as low as this with a reasonable chance, and it could be as high as this. And the point was the stock could actually be going down substantially or up substantially, and we wouldn't know it. And I think that was effective. I think people sort of understood what you were presenting there. Rather than just say the CV is X.
Right.
It was, well, here's a reasonably plausible increase and decrease that's consistent with this level of uncertainty.
That sounds really useful.
I thought it was good.
Yeah, really.
You remind me of the assessment part of this. Simulating the impact on the assessment. Is that including loss of biological information? Like is your CV on the comps going up?
It will. Well, I'll just reduce the sample size in proportion to the missing areas. But, again, yeah, I think, as well as it's including the change in CV, it will change in the.
And do you know what that relationship is like between the sample size and the variance of those?
Well, we bootstrapped the sample sizes from the raw sampling design to get an effective sample size. And so I will just probably reduce that effective sample size. Bootstrap every combination. But I think we can approximate that reasonably well. Now, of course, we still will have the composition data from the fishery. That will be presumably unbiased. So that'll help the assessment. But there will be an additional lag because the fishery is 2 to 4 more years before the fishery season plus survey. Luckily, we're not generally fishing on the youngest ages. Average catch is 8 to 16 years old. So there's a couple of those year classes that are a little bit uncertain when the fisheries really starts catching at age 8, but by age 10, we have a.
Yeah, and you don't really adjust like maybe they do with these ad hoc procedures. They adjust the fishing intensity to reflect year classes. Maybe they're going down now because that's part of this ad hoc thing you're doing now. But in general, management strategy would do that. Your target SPR would be based on typical. Big cohort. It's going to be.
Yeah, we saw the assessment that there's a lot of variability in what the assessment predicted the TCY would be at an SPR 43% over the last 8 years. And I remember there was a period around between 1920 or something where the assessment says, oh, the TCY this year is 34 million. And next year it was like the TCY is 45 million pounds. And then the following year, oh, the TCY is now 36 million pounds. And the commission asked a lot of questions. Why is the management procedure producing such variable results from year to year? And Ian looked into that and found it was really the prediction of the 2012 year class coming in. And so it was 1 year, there was a small amount of indication that this 2012 is going to be strong. And so it said high TCY. And then the next year, the age data came in and said, actually, it's not quite that strong. And so it's that it's not as big, so we can't actually take it. And this is, it's trying to predict it right before it starts to get selected by the fisheries. So that's the tough. And with your classes, the way they move, and the this Tableau interactive apps, you can sort of track cohorts through time in the FIS and watch them flow through the stock. And the way that they flow, if we're not sampling outside these core areas, that's my concern, is you might be missing them as they're coming down the pipeline and coming in, and we might see them a year later than we would if we were surveying outside the core areas.
That's fine. And to see this really has to hold all those other objectives constant.
Yeah.
Variability.
Yep.
Also, I think to hold inter-annual variability constant, that's where you really lose the.
So you're saying because this was something the SRB said in the past about the MSE, so you're saying find the SPR that actually results in the same interannual variability for these different scenarios, and so you're saying, okay, let's say we want a 15% variability. This is the SPR and the TCUIs that would result from that same meeting the objective in the exact same way across these designs, and then you're adjusting the TCUIs to calculate those
I think
values.
it has to be, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you've got qualitative differences in the
Yeah.
different scenarios as
Yeah.
well. Otherwise, reduced core, results in less TCEY, but also increased variability. And what's the value of that increased variability?
Yeah. So you got to hold one of
them.
them constant. Gotcha.
You wanted to mention the constant, which is typically the risk one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
And I think, in addition to that, if you want to include that cost in here, you have to decide whether you're going to be talking about the dockside value of the TCUI or whether you're going to add economic multipliers to that.
Yeah.
Economic multipliers are real.
Yeah.
It's a real thing when there's less, fish coming in, which means less processing jobs.
Yep.
But
And you
I
can-
think that's when it gets a little bit tricky for a lot of the commissioners will have we'll see that as inflating the numbers.
But even with that, I think providing this as a quantitative measure, I think it's worth to mentioning it even qualitatively over and over, because that's something that is on people's mind and that it is guiding a lot of the decisions, maybe not in a very kind of structured input way.
I would try to make it all as quantitative as possible so that you can have this table and see what the true cost of the survey is for different designs.
We did calculate the multipliers.
Yeah, right. I know you already have those. So you probably want to include that in the calculations as well, or maybe do it both ways. I think I think we're starting to realize there's a ton of decision points for this, and it'd be really nice to be able to weigh in on some of those decision points here in September if it's ready then or later.
And certainly those numbers are way more, there's much more confidence, I think, in those multipliers in terms of the impact on the commercial sector. The recreational sector is a little bit more tricky in terms of the data availability and how far you should go with looking at the multipliers for the recreational sector. But certainly for the commercial sector, these numbers are pretty straightforward and very comparable from our analysis comparing to the analysis that we've done for multiple sectors on a different scale of binocular fisheries, at least if we think about looking specifically at Alaska.
You almost don't need an analysis to know that $600,000 compared to the net benefit to the two nations of having a reliable survey is a trivial piece. It's connecting the pieces that's hard.
Well, I mean, it might actually say that this base block design is a poor value because you should be sampling if it would let you closer to the root. A little bit finer. I don't know. We have to do the analysis to find out, but I think that's really, really valuable.
But I think the analysis of comparing, like, is decreasing the footprint in the areas where we fish mostly to make it more revenue neutral versus like applying that investment elsewhere and for having the more reliable estimates overall. I think just looking at the foregone benefit and trying to understand fishermen, like what is the actual loss related to that? That would be really interesting.
Excited about this.
We can reiterate, this is why you need objectives, clear objectives. Otherwise, you get down to maybe just looking at the wrong problem. It just, could be so far off into outer space as far as, just pay it. It's like I had my brakes done last week. I was like, just pay it. I know it's a lot. Just pay it.
Need breaks.
The guy calls me, it's going to be this much, as though like I had a choice. Do it.
You just fix one side.
What can we do something this year?
You want me to finish the last part? This will be quick. It's following up from the last meeting we had. You previously recommended we look at 3D models as an alternative to the type models that we're using. And we did some preliminary analyses last year. For a few areas presented in September, looked very promising. Showed that, let's see what we got. Yeah. So, bit of background. The current delta gamma model, the space-time model for survey data. To be clear what this is, accounts for the probability of zero catch and the distribution of non-zero catch through two model components linked by a common spatiotemporal correlation structure. We have a Bernoulli process for the probability of zero observation and a gamma process for the non-zeros. Covariates are included in both model components, which increases model complexity relative to alternative parameterizations and potentially slows down the runtime for these models. The 3D model is implemented in our inlay as a compound Poisson gamma model. Zeros and non-zeros are modeled together and therefore requires fewer parameters when covariates are included. We presented at the last meeting some promising results from putting the 3D model to all sizes, weight per unit effort, 3 IPHC regulatory areas. Here we've expanded this. We're now looking at 0.32 weight per unit effort, which is what we usually use for analysis of survey data for example, the survey evaluations you just saw. For all IPHC regulatory areas, and we used the deep information criterion as a measure of model fit. Talk a little bit about that. We're hopeful that this was going to show the promise for the 3D model. Just to a little more background, I'm comparing the models that I fitted over the last year with the Poisson gamma with models fitted this year with the 3D model. In that time, the software got revised and I got a new computer, faster computer. So that was probably part of why things, that is affected. It led to improvements in model speed for the previous models that we were fitting in, to the point where when I was doing these evaluations, I could churn them out much faster. They saw in the previous part of this presentation, much faster than I've been able to previously. Previously, it would take a week to run 4 CDE models, and I could almost do it overnight. So the improvements in computing power, whatever changes they made to their software itself, the R package, really made a difference. And the gains we would get from the 2D were not as important as they seem. That was one of the main motivations for using it, because of the often prohibitive amount of time it would take to fit some of these models and doing them over along with the evaluation. that was greatly improved. But I don't have a clean comparison sometimes for this because of the changes between fitting the two sets of models. But we do have the model fits. So first, which is I think it's in the report at least, we got similar estimates of the parameters that they had in common. So our understanding of the spatial temporal correlation structure did not change whether you're using the delta gamma model, the Poisson gamma model, or the Tweedy model, which is reassuring. Our understanding of the related in space and time remained the same. But the model fit in this case was actually almost consistent, based on the DIC, consistently worse for the Tweedy model. The DIC was higher across all models and sometimes all areas, and sometimes substantially higher in case of 4CVE. 4CVE is an interesting case because that is an area where we have two types of data. We have control data and FIS data. We're putting them together. There are a lot of zeros in 4CD, so it seemed that the extra flexibility of the Poisson gamma model for handling those zeros was important in allowing the model to fit better with the delta gamma model. Less so for other areas, but as far as differences in DIC, those are all big differences. It's the absolute value of the difference, not the relative value that matters here. So that was kind of surprising, and I see what else. Oh yeah, so these are the outputs in terms of the time series. Except for the early years, in areas where we had relatively little data in the first place, 2A, 4B, 4A. Those early years, there's either no survey or very little information informing those estimates. But except for those early years, the time series are reassuringly consistent. There are some differences in the estimates of uncertainty, but generally, it's not telling a different story. It's not going to have any switching from one model to the other, which is reassuring. It's not going to have a change on our understanding of the stock or influence management decisions in any meaningful way. So that's nice, but it also, so were we to switch, it wouldn't be impactful from that perspective. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of benefit to doing that change. Now, I've mentioned the DIC. We had a paper published recently which used the DIC to compare some models. One of the reviewers some concern about using that for these types of models, and suggested that maybe a cross-validation type method was preferable. And so I did, for that paper, I ended up doing a cross-validation method as well. I've forgotten what you call them, but I left out 20% of the data and then predicted that those and compared with predictions with their values, and did that sequentially until I went through the whole data set. And I did, now it's not in this report, but since I produced this, I did this for one area, that repeated that exercise for one area, and you get an overall statistic, MSE, a mean square error. So mean square error value based on that, which becomes another model comparison statistic. And for the paper, it didn't really make any difference. The selected model was the same regardless of whether you use DIC or this cross-validation statistic. I worked through the process for 2C here because it takes a bit more time to run the model 5 times to get through all the data, and both versions of the model. And it actually was a little more in favor of the Tweedy than it was for the delta gamma in terms of that measurable. So that may be something I need to go through for all models. But when I look at the plots of the predicted values from the cross-validation versus the observed values, it's really hard to see one being better than the other. There's a lot of scatter. One thing here, the observed values and what you're predicting, which is the posterior mean at a station, is more variability in an observed value than a posterior mean value. You get higher observed values, but when you've got a posterior mean, those extreme values don't show up. But you still get a sense of what's going on. When I did it for last year for the Tweety, I didn't present those either. You could see a shift in the Tweety getting a little more compact. I couldn't see any in these plots, and so that's one area. One issue with it. So I'd like to do some more work on this. I'd like to I'm not proposing we discard this, but there's not the same impetus for switching at this point. So I think, what do I say? Yeah, continue to investigate the usefulness. This is not a lot of effort now that I've got it all set up to fit these models. Again, things are moving faster. I can do both for the coming assessment cycle probably, and at least for one variable like O32 weighting effort, and see how these comparisons play out. It's the main benefit was not changing in the estimates, reevaluating our understanding. It was saving time, and we're now saving time. So that's that. That's that update. That's it. I didn't put a recommendation there, but it's kind of built in that you're noting the paper. Recommendation.
Who's your we might have talked about this before, but you thought about at some point transitioning to one of the auto diff approaches? Like, does our inlay use automatic differentiation?
I don't know the answer to that. I can't remember if that's part of the process. I think there's, so what's an example?
Well, like VAST was one. I know
VAST
Canadians are
and
using this
it's-
SDM-TMD package.
Yeah. I think fundamentally they're doing the same thing. They're built on.
I know they're doing the same thing, yeah, just whether it's, I think those would be faster.
Okay.
I think
Quite likely they would be. I've looked superficially at those. For a while, they didn't have all the flexibility that our inlet had for some of the things that we're doing. I think they've improved since I looked at them more closely. I did talk to Sean Anderson briefly this year at one of our 100-year events about his work, and I've seen some of their presentations. I think that would be the one that I would lean towards rather than DOS, which I think they might be setting aside now.
Phasing out.
Phasing out, yeah.
SDTMB is a lot easier to use
And it's within R, so it's got that.
and faster.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought about it. I haven't had the motivation to actually
I know it's
try it out yet to see how it take things. Things that some of these weren't so good at in the past were like dealing with holes in the space like island, making sure islands were, you could have the islands were barriers essentially in the model. I think that they may have that in they have other features that we don't have in our, such as anisotropic models, which we can't do. Because one of the reasons that Jim Thorson started doing his own thing because he didn't find flexibility, and that's still not there. So there are pluses and minuses. It's worth a look. I just, when I come around to it, I've got this whole pile of other stuff to do, and so if you know that in your report, that might make this is something that I think is worth looking at and trying out.
I don't know. I mean, I leave it to you. I mean,
Okay.
I work with a lot of outputs from those. I
Yeah.
never, like, people that I work with use them and stuff. They seem to get results really quickly that are fairly stable, and they seem happy with it. So I'm just asking.
Yeah.
I don't want to put something in the report that
Okay.
puts an extra burden on you for it.
There's some, it seems like there's some benefits to going. In terms of maybe some increasing level of flexibility. But as an aside, not aside, but something I actually forgot to mention in the report, I have been also looking at coastal space-time model. Instead of doing area by area, having a coastline model and having the parameters vary spatially to still account for that spatial variation in the correlation structure and covariance. And I've made some progress towards doing that. I think I started off doing it with Tweety to make it faster. But one of the hardest parts was creating the mesh that this is overlaid on and having it sufficiently detailed to account for the nature of the coast and all the islands over that, while still being a practical thing that you can actually do. But I got that sorted out, and I had some initial runs that worked quite well, and was increasing complexity and started getting some crashes. But anyway, that's something I'm exploring. That would, and if I could do a whole, it would integrate everything a lot better than having these piecewise models, which there's some places at the edge where they probably don't mesh properly where they join.
And do you fit it iteratively then? So the values predicted on the edge are used for the predictions in the next one, or do you just do them completely independently, ignoring data across the boundary?
Oh, for at present.
Yeah.
I have a buffer zone, so I include data
So
partly
pull
into the
them out.
neighboring area.
Yeah.
So when you plot the maps, they look really nice and smooth because they are. But there are some, like the 3A, I'm getting different parameter estimates for the parameters than I do for 3B. So there is possibly some differences in prediction. Where it's more of a concern, more of an issue is when I'm compiling these at a larger unit, like a biological region or a coastwide value. And so the correlation where they mesh doesn't exist because they're fitted independently. So you don't have one set of data that's spanning the entire biological region. So with the joining, this set for 3A is independent of this set for 3B. So there's some structure lost when we put things together and having a model that does all at once. So sure, I don't think it's very important. It's very small part of the region because the spatial correlation drops out. Very more. It's something. And I've been working.
Just on the Tweety stuff, it seems like you've run this one down, and if the benefits aren't there, I'm certainly not pressing for you to keep working on that.
I mean, it's got a lot of appeal in terms of how it simplifies the model.
It's in the pudding.
Yeah, and getting a single coefficient for scale, like rate comparison instead of two coefficients on different parts of the model. But I think one of the differences between what I've done this time and what I did last time is because last time we were getting full sizes way too many zeros because it brings in the small fish. This time I'm fitting 032, which there are more zeros in the data and the extra flexibility that the modeling the zeros sort of semi-separately allows to those improvements compared to last time.
So the Tweety can't accommodate all of those extra zeros without pulling the mean down for the.
Yeah, not quite the same. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Did you have any? So we have, now that we've done the age composition AI work, brings us up to agenda item 5, which is management supporting information. Sorry.
No. What I was thinking we could potentially do, Chair, is break early for lunch, and then use this afternoon for the sort of informal discussions we were referring to yesterday. And whether that's just individual SRB members meeting with teams again, or if you want to just be in here
available for broader discussion, whether it be about MSE, about survey design. That'd be quite useful. And then towards the end of the afternoon, have that drafting session where hopefully you can finalize a draft report that the team can go away overnight and then first thing in the morning have a good read through, and then potentially provide some additional feedback to you for your last drafting session tomorrow. So that means we potentially wouldn't have a formal session again today. This afternoon.
Sorry, you meant us putting out our draft and letting you have it overnight?
Overnight or
Back and
first thing in the
revising?
morning, depending on how you progress with it today. But the idea being is that this afternoon you would use that time to really hash out anything else you'd like to include, or just comment on any of the other research avenues that we have going as well.
I was thinking the same.
Well, it's fresh, maybe.
Yeah, it's fresh in mind.
And then have those conversations.
Okay, so we break for lunch early. Then we get on with maybe an hour SRB drafting session. So it's 12:30, 1:30, so that would be coming back at 2:30. That's good.
But not formally, just.
That's right, just the informal sessions at 2:30. Are we going to involve the web friends?
Challenge, but we could if you want.
I never hear from them, so I don't know.
It might just be easy to keep it as an informal.
Let's have an informal in-camera session. So we can, like tooth and nail over things.
Thank you very much.
Okay,